How's it going, everyone? So glad you joined me in this video. Today we are going to look at an article by the far left Labour Senator Kristina Keneally, who has decided to write an article about the two shootings over in America. Obviously, she's a communist, someone on the far left, therefore she's not going to let these tragedies go to waste. She's going to use them to push her agenda. But before we begin, I'm just going to ask you really nicely to please check out my social media links in the description. Come and follow me on Gab, come and follow me on Minds, BitChute, and Discord, and I've got a couple of others as well. The reason being, YouTube are constantly silencing and suppressing content, so if you want to get notifications or if you want to see the content that I actually produce for these platforms exclusively, then those are the best way to follow me there. And if you like the video, please share it around, because we do need to share the truth and spread our message as best as we can. That said, let's get straight into it. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Matty Rose Live and tune in to my weekly live stream with editor of the XYZ, David Hiscox, where we discuss all the biggest news of the week. We go live every Monday at about 9:15 Australian Eastern Time. Can't wait to see you there. Link in the description. So she's talking about the two shootings as mentioned. She said we can't bury our heads when it comes to right-wing extremism! Just ridiculous. So you'll see here, I've just highlighted that she's pointing out the Dayton, Ohio shooting. So she says on Sunday, a wave of sadness consumed me about that. And then 20 hours earlier, there was the El Paso, Texas shooting, where she mentions that he was a WN and he didn't like migrants, and he put this manifesto online where he was sort of glorifying the guy with the initials BT. The interesting thing about this is she's mentioned both of these shootings, but she's only mentioned the motivation of one of them. The reason being the guy in Dayton, Ohio was actually a radical leftist who was radicalized online, constantly inciting violence via his Twitter account as well, at least according to reports before it was taken down. But surprise, surprise, she hasn't mentioned his ideology. She's only mentioned the other guy's supposed ideology. Again, I don't know if that is actually his words. I'm not 100% sure. I look at the guy, he doesn't look exactly like a WN, but you know what? Well, it is what it is. The point being that she's using it to attack her political opponents, but when there's someone on her side that goes and commits an act that is just as bad, suddenly the ideology just isn't relevant. Also, when she first wrote this article, she actually said that both Dayton, Ohio and the El Paso shooter were white supreme pizzas. She's edited it now, but no acknowledgement that she made that mistake. This is because the left always attack other people's ideology, but when it's their ideology at fault, suddenly it becomes irrelevant. She says, in El Paso, what began as ugly rhetoric online sprouted twisted roots, and it turned into an even uglier, violent reality. It's in these tragic moments we should be thankful for the reforms made by John Howard following the Port Arthur massacre. If there's one thing Australians agree on, it is our robust, comprehensive, and hopefully uncompromising gun control laws. A couple of issues with this. Firstly, there was never a vote on gun control, so the idea that Australians agree on that is a lie. She has no idea whether Australians agree on that. I would imagine there are millions and millions of Australians who are vehemently opposed to gun control. Me being one of them. I will link in the description to a video that I actually did about this, but you can also go and look at Stefan Molyneux's video, The Truth About Gun Control, and you can look at Red Elephant's video on gun control. I'm not going to link them, you can just go and find them yourselves. She's also trying to make the connection between the ugly rhetoric spouted online by the guy in El Paso and somehow connecting that to violence, which is just, no, it's absolutely, it's nonsense. Like, someone going online and saying things isn't what causes violence. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, but also notice how she talks about El Paso and not the Dayton, Ohio shooter who was radicalized online by the mainstream media and the parasitic establishment, but for some reason only the El Paso shooter gets a mention in regards to his ideology. But she moves on when she says, these laws have prevented mass shootings and terrorism attacks alike, with Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton saying on Monday, quote, we have been able to thwart terrorist attacks in part because of gun law reform that we've had in our country, end quote. This is, again, just nonsense, because if you have a look at the actual statistics regarding murder and crime and all that kind of thing, gun control has not made us safer. The murder rate in 1996, when Port Arthur happened and when they rushed through gun control, was actually lower than it was in 2001. John Howard used that tragedy to push through controls over the Australian populace. If the government wanted people to be safe from murder and crime, then they would essentially mandate gun ownership, because a armed society is a polite society, and they'd also close the borders and not allow foreigners in, because anyone who is actually switched on and has done their own research knows that there is a much higher correlation between race and crime than there is between gun ownership and crime. In fact, there is no correlation whatsoever between the number of guns in society and the number of murders. In fact, it's a slightly negative correlation, and don't quote me on this, but I believe in white countries, in ethnically white nations, the more guns there are, the safer they are. So this is actually a flat out lie. And Peter Dutton, well, he's a member of the establishment as well. But she says here, security agencies have confirmed at least one of these thwarted attacks related to a right-wing extremist. Now, I did a little bit of research because I didn't know what she was talking about. And the only one, there's another guy who used bombs back in 2000s and the 80s who was a nationalist, but I don't think that's who she's talking about. The only one I could find was this bloke here, Joshua Ryan Goldberg. Very German-sounding name, Goldberg. Right there, and you can see he is not an Australian citizen, actually. He committed crimes in America, and they call him far right, apparently. I mean, he went and had a number of personas online, and yeah, they said that he also planned terrorist attacks in Australia, but he was arrested in America, so I'm not sure exactly what she's talking about there. It's just really an attempt at attacking her political opponents and trying to conflate right-wing extremists to violence, which is just nonsense, given we know how violent the left actually is. And the fact that most nationalists I see are distinctly calling for the opposite of that, of violence that is. And here we go. At the same time, the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, is descending on Sydney this weekend with a slew of pro-gun Americans taking the stage. Both CPAC hosts Matt Schlupp and Dan Schneider are lifetime members of the NRA. Oh no! You mean there are people who own guns who are actually going to make arguments in favour of gun ownership? How could they do this? Oh no! How could anyone advocate for our God-given right to defend ourselves? We have to take our guns away. We have to make ourselves slaves of the government. We have to be at the mercy of an all-powerful state and criminals who own all the guns. But I repeat myself. Australia has been relatively isolated from the recent rise in white supreme pizza extremism and the violence it fosters, though we cannot ignore that one of our own was inspired by it and took his murderous intent to New Zealand. So you're going to have a look here. So this is what she's using to set up the next bit. She did it before, where she's talking about security agencies and thwarting terror-related incidents. And then immediately after, she talks about CPAC. It's a lie by structure designed to make you associate violence with CPAC. It's a very dishonest way of operating. She'll say, no, that's not what I'm doing, but it's obvious what she's doing. It's a lie by structure. She's trying to connect them by putting them next to each other in the piece. And she does it here as well, where she says, ASIO says it's tracking 100 far-right groups, and its head, Duncan Lewis, says extremist groups become of interest only when their motivation crosses the line and moves into violence. This means there are up to 100 right-wing groups in Australia with the potential to commit acts of violence and possibly more lurking in the dark shadows of the internet forums. Have a look at what she's written there and the quotations and how it's actually structured. So what she's trying to tell you, what she's trying to say is, far-right groups are bad, you should be afraid of them. But the head of ASIO, Duncan Lewis, the old boy, has only said that groups become of interest when they cross the line into violence. That means there are 100 right-wing groups that have not yet crossed into violence. She's essentially pointing out that our movement is peaceful, and this is confirmed by ASIO, but you'll see later on she wants to censor us because she's an idiot. While the Morrison government quickly passed laws aimed at preventing the stream of future attacks like that in Christchurch, some have said these laws, while well-intentioned, are too little, too late. The laws did not silence alt-right voices on 8chan, a website widely seen as a megaphone for mass shooters and a platform for violent white nationalists to brag about their desires to beat the high scores of mass murderers by killing more people. This is just ridiculous what she's saying. So it's not silencing people. She wants you to silence people. She wants Scott Morrison to silence people. And the argument being that if we can just silence people, then somehow that will make them not commit an act of violence. But we know for a fact that this just isn't true. And we'll see here in this story from last year, back in December 2018, where there's a study saying big tech censorship of hate speech may cause violence, warns terrorism expert, where they say a new study published in the University of Nevada School of Law's journal spells caution for any big tech company considering deplatforming or censoring hate speech. So Gordon Denning said, quote, there is substantial evidence that censorship and demonization of hate groups members is counterproductive because it tends to lead to more violence, not less. To understand why that is the case, it is essential to take a step back and consider why individuals engage in political violence in the first place. Individuals engage in political violence only when they have grievances. Exactly. And when people are able to air those grievances and have at least a chance at being listened to and they're not suppressed or removed from social media or websites or platforms like YouTube, then not only is it cathartic for them, not only are they able to actually vent their frustrations, but people like myself and others can then debate these people and maybe engage with them in better ideas and potentially bring them back from engaging in an act of political violence. But what she wants to do is silence them, and she's not going to be able to get them off the internet. If you take down 8chan, which actually does remove and ban illegal speech, so actual genuine calls to violence they do ban. But you're not going to stop them by getting rid of 8chan. 8chan might go, but then they'll start another website and they'll go somewhere else. They'll go into the even more darker corners of the internet where they get into an echo chamber and they feel aggrieved and oppressed, because it's true, they are being oppressed by the establishment, and they're only that much more likely to go and commit an act of violence. I don't want that to happen. I do not want our society to engage in any activity of that nature or any individual to do it, and this is why I want people such as the El Paso shooter or even BT, all these individuals, I would much rather them engage with ideas, and that means we actually have to listen to people like that and try and counter their ideas and de-radicalize them in that regards. The best way to de-radicalize someone is by speaking with them, engaging with them, listening to them, and presenting counter arguments and just showing that you accept that they have an opinion and that they do have grievances. Nationalists do have grievances. We are being ethnically replaced. We are having our liberties stifled and attacked. That's the truth. That's a fact. Those are grievances. And if you're going to censor people talking about that, if you're going to stop people from trying to warn others and express their distaste at that, well, this study shows, the study that I showed you here, this study shows that all you can expect is more violence. It begs the question, whose side is Morrison on? Australians or CPAC and its pro-gun alt-right hate speech agenda? Oh, that's just... Oh no, CPAC, which is basically BoomerCon, just a bunch of conservative boomers. They are hate speech! But this just shows where these left-wing communists are actually coming from. Anyone who disagrees with them is hate speech. Anyone. Absolutely anyone. They want to censor any opinion that they disagree with. And honestly, she doesn't care about violence. It is my honestly held opinion that she actually wants this kind of action to happen, because then she can write articles like this calling for the banning of speech that she doesn't like. This is why it is so important that we do not engage in acts of political violence, because these parasites want people to do that. That way, they can use the power of the system, which is force, to then crush all dissent. That's their goal. And this is exactly what she said. We together need to confront the spread of outright and white nationalism in Australia, as is the case with our gun laws. This should not have to be a matter of sides. Only she is picking a side. She's picking a side of her people against alt-right, which is basically conservacucks according to her, and people who just want to keep Australia, ultimately. So she wants to censor absolutely anyone who she disagrees with, and somehow this isn't a matter of sides. No, she's an absolute fool. She doesn't like freedom of speech. And if you really want to spread, or if you want to stop the spread of ideas that you don't like, the number one way to do that is to present better ideas, to counter their arguments. The reason that these people do not want to do that, the reason they want to censor us and suppress anyone that they disagree with, is because they know for a fact that in a debate, in a fair discussion where there's no censorship and where there's no suppression, our side wins and her side loses. I hope you enjoyed the video. Share the truth around, and I'll see ya when I see ya.